Hey, welcome back to this study of Joshua. This is Allen, and I'm Josh, and today we're looking at Joshua chapter 18. Well, as always, we like to encourage you, if you haven't had time to read the chapter up until this point, just simply hit the pause button, read the chapter, and then join us as we continue the study. And if you're new, this is the first episode that you've seen of this study, we'd encourage you to go back in the series to the introduction portion so you can get caught up and have that foundational support of what we're studying. Alan, how you doing today?
Doing well. It's a good day.
I'm
how
enjoying it. Doing well.
Good.
Doing well. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll look at Joshua 18.
Let's sort of set our bearings on where we are. This is a book. Joshua is a book about the land, and they are dividing the land in the section where we are. There's 7 tribes plus the Levites who've not received their inheritance by chapter 18. And here Joshua is encouraging them to get with it. You know, you've had time, you've not done what you're supposed to. God's given it to you. Why don't you take it? So that's the background of chapter 18. And he's divided the land with Judah, and then the sons of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh have received their inheritance in the previous chapters. And now he's going to start with Benjamin and go through the other tribes that will receive land. The Levites will receive cities, and we'll see those when we get a little further into the book. Let's do the keys to the chapter first. We're going to call Joshua 18 Benjamin's inheritance, because the last section deals with the borders of Benjamin's section of the land. It's really squeezed in between, as we'll notice on the map. Judah and Ephraim both had larger areas. Benjamin had a small area, but that was the tribe that was reduced to almost nothing, or will be when later. So they're not going to need as much. The key verse is chapter 18:11. Key thought: Joshua demonstrates good leadership principles, and we'll identify those as we go through the first section of Joshua 18. Now, an outline: there are 3 sections. The first verse is the first section, and that deals with the tabernacle setup. And we'll tell you when we read that, I'll put it on the map so we can see where it's located. The second section, verses 2 through 10, the central land is measured and divided. So they had conquered the land in the central area first, then south, and then north. And now they're back to where the original battles started. They're going to measure it. It's going to send out 21 citizens from those 7 tribes, 3 per tribe. They're going to measure it, what we would call survey it, come back, and then he will divide it with the Lord's help, with the Lord's direction. And then 11 to 28, Benjamin's inheritance. So we'll see the largest section deals with mostly the cities and the borders from Benjamin. We won't read all of that section, but we'll see the gist of it. Let's start in verse 1. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle of the congregation there. So you might put an equal sign between Shiloh and set up the tabernacle to remember that's the place where God places his name first in the land of Canaan. And he's going to move it, of course, later to Jerusalem, and that'll be permanently when they build the tabernacle. But for now, when they build the temple, but for now it's going to be in Shiloh. I'm going to put that on the map so we can appreciate where we are. So this is a map of the inheritance of the 12 tribes, and we've dealt already with Judah's green on this map. That's just west of the Dead Sea. Pretty much all the Dead Sea is bordered by Judah's property. And then Ephraim, which is purple on this map, is north of Judah, and then Manasseh, the very large orange section on the map. Now, Benjamin is going to be squeezed between them in the blue, between the Judah and Ephraim, and we'll come back to that, but I wanted to see where Shiloh, which is just a city that's in Ephraim, is located. So we have the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea. So just a little north and west of Jerusalem, you have what's actually due north of Jerusalem, but it's west It's west of the city, the River Jordan. So Shiloh is going to be a famous city from this point on. Of course, it was mentioned that the Prince of Peace would come out of Judah, and that will be the Shiloh means peace, and so you have a connection there. Now, I want to go back into the text and observe a few things from this early section. I've put brackets around verse 2 because that's really what this whole section is about from here on in the next few chapters. And there remained of the children of Israel 7 tribes which had not received their inheritance. So Judah, Ephraim, Manasseh, and then those tribes on the east side of the Jordan River, and the children of Levi will not receive any inheritance. But you got these 7 that still need to receive an allotment so they can get settled. They're still nomadic in the time when they're supposed to be living in the cities. So Joshua builds a fire under them a little bit. Verse 3, Joshua said unto the children of Israel, how long are you slack to go to possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers hath given you? There are several things here to note. I think the first one, this is a note from Matthew Henry's commentary, that a year or more has passed between the command to go and conquer and where they are now. So it's not that he was rushing them. They've had plenty of time to lay out a plan and, to get organized and to go. They're just dragging their feet. Now, I see for those in this study who are preachers or Bible teachers, 3 points to make in verse 3. How long are you slack? So I put quotation marks around that because that's a good sermon title. How long are you going to remain inactive? It's time to get busy. And then to go. That's the second point. And of course, we are instructed to go with the gospel to the whole world. We're to go to our friend if we have a disagreement with him. We're to go to those that have wandered away and bring them back. There are many verbs or many applications of the verb go. Don't sit still, get up and be busy about the Lord's business. And then the third section is to possess the land. Now, Canaan is the land of that represents heaven. Crossing over the Jordan River into Canaan is represented in our singing and in our theology of crossing over the river of death and going to heaven, to Canaan. So when you think about to possess the land, I would make 2 applications there. One is, how long are you slack before you become a Christian? Why are you waiting? Sometimes young people say, well, I want to wait a while. I'm going to sow my wild oats, or I'm going to, get serious about Christianity later. Well, why do you wait? Today's the day of salvation, and we are not guaranteed tomorrow. 2 Corinthians 6:2, Proverbs 28:1. So tonight our soul might be required of us. Luke 12:15, 16 through 21, the parable of the rich farmer. So it's time to possess the land. It's time to get in line for your inheritance in heaven, because that day will be here, and it may be sooner than we think. Also, a second application is, how long will you wait to come back? There are some that grew up in the church. They were faithful and active for a while, but maybe during college they wandered away. I got indifferent, or maybe lost their faith, or there's different reasons why people wander away. But in the back of their minds, many of them say, I'm going to come back. I'm not going to stay in the world. I know what I was taught. I know what I believe, and I want to go to heaven. But how long are you going to wait?
Right.
If you wait too long, every year that you wait, the tentacles of the world adhere themselves to you, to your soul. That the addictions, the relationships, the habits that I form while I'm in the world can be hard to overcome. When I want to come back. Many times when young people go into the far country thinking they're going to come back, they're in that pivotal time of life when they choose a career, when they choose a companion. And if you choose someone outside the body of Christ to be the closest to you in this life, and maybe he or she's not going to want to come to the Lord if they didn't have the same background that you have, or if they don't have the same inclination or desire to come back and be a part of the church. So be careful about staying in the far country. Come back. God's been good to you. If you still have your mind, you still have your health, you still have life, then God certainly has been good to you. So why grieve the Holy Spirit? Why would you thumb your nose at God and say, well, I'm going to do what I want to do, and if I get around to it, I'll come back later. I'm going to give the world my youth. I'm going to give the world my strength, and then whenever I'm ready to go to heaven, I'm old and washed up, then maybe I'll come back. Well, that's not a happy or proper way to think, and it may be that the world will not want to release us, and we may not have the strength that we think we will have. So don't give the world any more time. Come back. Don't wait to be restored, and think about all the people that you can influence. Those people that are closest to you: spouse, children, close friends, family members. The longer a person stays away from the Lord, the more negative influence is exerted on those.
Right.
And the sooner he comes back, the sooner he can correct that. And maybe if you do come back when your children are teenagers, let's say, and you say, let's all go to church, it's time to. Well, they may not. At that stage, it may be hard to convince them to change their thinking, their lifestyle, and to include the Lord. But if you had started when they were small,
right,
they would have taken it to heart. So I think we see this. How long are you slack to go to possess the land which the Lord your God, or the Lord God of your fathers, hath given you? So I see the past tense in the last part of that verse, hath given you. So God had given it to them already, but there were stipulations to it. And the application of that, I think, is obvious to those who've studied the New Testament. God has given us salvation. It's available. There's a ticket to heaven for every person on earth. But every person on earth is not going to be saved, because Matthew 7, 13 and 14, there's a broad road and many are traveling it that ends up in destruction. So we know that not everybody's going to be saved, but everybody could be saved. So there must be some response required on our part in order to receive the gift. Just like here, they had received the gift, but they had to go conquer it. They had to go inherit it. And so a person who's sitting back waiting for God to work a miracle on his heart or in his life, as Calvinism teaches one to expect, is not what the New Testament teaches. New Testament says, why tarriest thou, arise and be baptized and wash away thy sins, Acts 22:16. So initiate the plan of salvation in your own life. God's provided it, but he's not going to take his finger and force you off your couch and into a church building or a river somewhere to be baptized. You've got to initiate that. So take that important step and inherit the gift that God has waiting for you. He's paid for. The only other thing I see in verse 3 that I think I'll bring out, there are some parallels in other verses on the how long are you slack. It reminds me of what Elijah said to the people of his generation when they couldn't make up their mind if they wanted to follow God or they wanted to follow Baal. So he asked a similar question to this one, 1 Kings 18:21. How long halt ye between two opinions? In other words, you take a step toward God, you take a step toward Baal. How long are you going to go back and forth? If God be God, follow him. If Baal be God, follow him. But make up your mind. Don't remain in that no man's territory, the neutral territory, but it's not really possible. And of course, in the New Testament, the same truth is taught. It's not possible for us to serve God and mammon. You got to make up your mind. Now, you can say, I'm neutral, but a neutral vote is a vote for the world.
Right.
Because you got, as we were just talking about, you got to follow God. That's active. Jesus said, I must work while it is day, for the night cometh when no man can work. John 9:4. So we only have so long to work. Why are we being slack? Because we can't get this day back. What we could have accomplished today, we'll never be able to accomplish. We may do the same thing tomorrow, but that's taking a day off somewhere down the line that we won't ever be able to accomplish as much as we could have if we had worked every day.
Right.
And then the word slack in verse 3 reminds me of Ephesians 4:14, which says that our hands can hang slack. We can get discouraged but Paul encourages them to take courage. Don't let your hands be slack. Be not weary in well-doing, Galatians 6:9. So how long are you slack to go and to possess the land which God hath given you? That gets us to verse 4. Give out from among you 3 men for each tribe, so 21 total. And I will send them, and they shall rise and go through the land and describe it according to the inheritance of them. 2 things there. We would probably use the word survey instead of describe in verse 4, because that's what they're doing. They're if you're going to buy a piece of property, you probably would walk the lines of it. You'll see where, exactly what am I purchasing? Does it include that clump of trees, or, does it have that water source? You'd want to go down the line and see. That's what they're doing here. They're looking at the area that they are going to inherit, but there's 7 tribes represented, so they're not going to get all of it. So they're going to be able to see, well, what will we be getting if we get this section or we get that section? And so I suppose that that made them say, well, we want this area over here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somebody else says, well, that's fine, but we want this area over here. So that once they put their eyes on it, then they were better informed and able to make better decisions about where they would live and what they would inherit. Now, the next thing I wanted to emphasize is that our keyword inheritance. We've been marking inherited, inheritance, and there's another one of those in verse 4. If you're marking your Bible, and you may want to put a box or indicate that key word. Now, the only other note that I have in verse 4 has to do with God choosing men from each tribe. That's fair. He didn't say, we're going to let this tribe go look at the land and then they'll come back and everybody can. No, he gave each one equal opportunity, which reminds me of the New Testament situation that developed in Acts 6 when they were taking care of the widows, but some of them were complaining because they said, we've been neglected. They're not taking care of us the same way they are. And so the apostles said, well, tell you what, we're going to turn this over to somebody else. And that's the first deacons, if I'm interpreting chapter 6 correctly. And he said, choose out for yourselves. And so when you look at the names of the ones that are chosen there, those are Greek names, and there were Grecian widows that were complaining. So it seems that by empowering them to fix the problem, that it worked out really well because they were represented now in the ones that were in charge of distributing the food sources. So you see the same thing here where God avoided some arguments,
right,
by including everybody. And we do that. We do well if we do that in the church. Elders are wise to, somebody has a complaint. Sometimes it's better to say, well, that's good. We hadn't thought of that. Mm-hmm. Would you mind heading that up for us or taking that on or bringing a report back to us? Tell us, because obviously the person cared enough to come and bring it to the attention of the elders. So they already have indicated an interest. And it may be that that interest will propel them to take care of the problem, whereas somebody else might not be interested and it might not be rectified very soon. And plus, elders, sometimes they can get bogged down putting out this fire and that fire and, everything else, and then their work is neglected. So if somebody is willing to take on a project, then it's often wise to supervise them, to let them do that. Now, sometimes you may just have a troublemaker and you don't want to empower a troublemaker to cause more trouble. So, elders know the flock and they know, the situations when they say, well, we'll think about that. Or why don't you take care of that? It's 2 different responses, but both would be wise under certain circumstances.
Right. I noticed here that, 3 men from each tribe. Thought about Numbers 13 when they sent one spy. And so I wonder if there's some plurality here. You notice in the New Testament, elderships are supposed to be plural. And we see the wisdom behind it. One, we have confidence in numbers typically, so it probably keeps one tribe from bullying, for lack of a better term, another tribe. When you have 3 men representing each one.
If you had one with a really strong dominant personality,
Right.
then so it'd be watered down a little more.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the other is just like you mentioned earlier, just different perspectives of the land, what's fair, and so forth. So,
and the old saying, 2 heads are better than one. So you've got 3 people looking at it, and also I've noticed in congregations, I guess especially smaller congregations, generally if you have 3 elders, let's say, a lot of times you'll have one that's a real people person and people gravitate to him, but also you'll have representatives of large sections of the congregation, like family groups or age groups. So it's helpful to have your elder in that sense. Not that anyone is over the others, or they're all equal, but if you don't feel comfortable talking to the elders, any of the elders, and that can be a negative.
Right.
But if you at least have one, you say, I trust him. I feel like I can talk to him. He's reasonable. Whatever. That would be the same thing here. Is you have these 3 representatives coming back to the tribes,
right.
to that individual tribe. And then, you're more likely to have a representative there, somebody that you're kin to, or somebody that you've known for a while that you say, well, tell me about this. I want to know, so I could see, like you were saying, the value of, if you just have one like they did when they sent the spies out, I'm sure that was sufficient for that purpose, but this is a different purpose.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Let's go into verse 5, and they shall divide, and that's also one of our key words, it into 7 parts. Judah shall abide in their coast on the south. They've already received their inheritance, so they don't have a dog in this fight, we would say today. They're settled. We've taken care of that. And the house of Joseph, that would be Ephraim and Manasseh, so 2 other tribes receive their inheritance. So we've taken care of that, shall abide in their coast to the north. So the south, where they were at Shiloh on our map, you see Shiloh's here in the middle, the central part of the land. Judah is south, and Ephraim is where Shiloh is in Ephraim, and then Manasseh is that large area to the north. So he's saying this property's already taken. There's no reason to survey that, because that's off the board. But go to the area that's still available and survey all of that, and then come back. And when you come back, I'll read your survey. I'll listen to what you say, and then we will move on. That's verse 6. Ye shall therefore describe the land into 7 parts, and bring the description hither to me, that I may cast lots for you here before the Lord our God. So Joshua is not turning authority or accountability over to somebody else. He's still keeping his hand in the mix. He's still going to be involved in it. He's just not going to be involved in these small details.
Right.
He's not going to take 2 weeks or whatever it took to walk the land and draw up the survey and come back. He said, you do that, come back and tell me. Now, I'm going to go and read a couple more verses, and then I want to go back and look at the leadership principles that we're seeing here, and that will be one of them. And the men arose and went away, and Joshua charged them. And so they go. They come back. Verse 9, and came again to Joshua to the host at Shiloh. And Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord. That is, the Lord was guiding it. The Lord was involved in it. And there Joshua divided the land unto the children of Israel according to their divisions. So I put a box around Joshua divided the land. That's a key concept in the whole book. This whole section is about that one phrase, Joshua divided the land. And then verse 11 is our key verse for this chapter, so I'll read that. And the lot of the tribe of the children of Benjamin. So of the 7 tribes, Benjamin is going to receive the first allotment. Came up according to their families, the coast of their lot came forth between the children of Judah and the children of Joseph. What that's saying, and you probably would want to put the orange box, or however you're marking the tribes. We've been marking each one with a box around the name, so you can sort of see as you go through the book who's receiving inheritance. But I wanted to go back and show what that verse 11 is saying on the map. He's saying that Benjamin is receiving property between, sort of squeezed in, wedged in between Judah, which received a lot more property, maybe 10 times as much, and then Ephraim that received maybe 3 times as much. So squeezed in between those two, you see Ephraim's border does not touch the border of Judah. Benjamin has most of that border, and then a little bit of Dan and a little bit of Manasseh that comes down by the Jordan River there. So just to sort of picture it, so you see what he's talking about. They received their inheritance between the inheritance of those larger tribes. Now I want to go back and talk about leadership principles of Joshua from this section. The first is a reprimand. There is a time for a leader to reprimand those that he's over or that they are over. And sometimes nothing gets action quicker than, hey, you're not doing what you need to be doing. Let's get with it. Every supervisor, boss man, foreman, they all use that tactic whenever they need to. And you can't crack the whip all the time, but once in a while, especially, when it's called for, you can't worry about your own popularity because that's not going to make you popular. But it's not really about that, is it? It's about getting the work done. And so elders, if they're in it for a popularity contest, then, obviously they've got motives that God doesn't want them to have. Now, they should be liked, even loved, and they should not antagonize people, because it's in your favor as a leader for people to like you and want to follow you. But sometimes you risk that for the greater good of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. Now, I've noticed in verse 3, this is another take on the same verse we saw, but it's a sermon called Taking Up the Slack. And you have these 4 points under it. The time, how long? You're wasting time. So time is your first consideration. And the second one is effort. How long are you slack? You're being lazy. You're not taking a hold of the plow. And then he reminds them of their assignment, number 3, to possess the land. And then he ends with assurance, which the Lord your God, the Lord God of your fathers hath given you. So the time, how long are you going to waste time? Effort, it's time to get busy. Assignment, this is what God said to do. And then assurance, God will help you. Right. So there's a good expository study in verse 3. Now I'm going to expand to the larger section. We dealt with leadership principle number 1, which is reprimand. The second one is to do the research. And that's in verse 4, where he sends out these 21 men. He didn't have to personally do the research. Elders that are looking to maybe build a church building across town or somewhere, they may go to one of the deacons or one of the members that has connections or maybe is involved in construction and say, well, we're looking at this piece of property over here. Would you mind evaluating that for us and getting back to us? And there's some things there that, does the seller have a clear right to the rights to the property, or is there a disputed line or something like that? Also, what about the land? How does it perk? Can we have a septic system here? And is there anything with the city as far as regulations about, can we build a building there, or is it residential? Some people have made some very foolish, expensive decisions and then found out, well, wait, we didn't know that. So you want to do your research. Same thing with mission work. You're going to take on a missionary. You're looking to send the gospel into a certain part of the world, country. Well, do your research. What language do they speak? What are the cultural problems? What about the economy? How are we going to deal with the government? Has anything ever been tried here before and failed, or is somebody else already reaching it that we didn't know about? So there's a lot of considerations, but as a congregation, you don't have unlimited resources. So you want to make the best use of your resources and saving as many souls as possible. So do your research, and you may assign that to someone else, but certainly that comes back to you, and you consider the information after you have a reliable source for it.
All great leaders, and we've mentioned this in so far is all good leaders listen.
Right.
And the best leaders that I've worked for or I have known are always aware of where their expertise falls short and compared to someone else, and they're willing to listen and take the information. It's not that they know everything, but they have a very keen ability to fill in where their expertise fills the gaps, but at the same time listen when their expertise falls short. There's a humility, I guess, to it.
Wisdom.
Absolutely.
Wisdom and knowledge differ. And you don't even have to possess the knowledge to use wisdom, which is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
You find the person that has that expertise, that knowledge, that background, and then they have wisdom enough to listen and to sort out what's important, what isn't, and to use that information. And, elders don't need to know every detail about how to accomplish this, It's like they just find the person that can, they don't have to know how to, laying the blocks and running the pipes for the plumbing and the wires for the electricity and the PowerPoint, all those projection systems. They don't need to know all that. Mm-hmm. They say, we know we need it, and we're going to get somebody to do it. Right. Plus it's even better for somebody else to feel that they have a part in it. Mm-hmm. It's a body, and no one part of the body does everything. It just does what he's best qualified or it's best qualified to do. All right, let me go down this list. Accountability is the third one. We did mention that. He said, go and come back and report to me. That's accountability. And good leaders always have accountability, because the tendency is to inertia, because every project has barriers and things that, what do we do now? We didn't know this was going to happen. And a lot of people just give up at that point. They don't find a workaround. They don't get somebody to help them. They just say, well, we tried and we hit this barrier and we went back to do something else. Well, that's where accountability comes in. Well, why didn't you tell us that? We would get you some help, because this project needs to move forward, and that's what's blocking. So accountability. The next one is responsibility. They assign to these 21 men clearly defined responsibility. I want you to go, observe, write, bring back to me. So responsibility. You want to have a fair job description for all those on your staff, for instance. You don't want competition among your ministers. If you have a youth minister and you have a pulpit guy and you have maybe an education minister, some larger congregations may have an evangelist, someone who specializes in evangelism. Well, just define it so that everybody knows what he's responsible for, and that there's no, I thought I was going to preach, this Sunday. No, it's, so just spell it out and keep the communication lines there so that you're not wasting time, and you're also not running the greater risk of hurt feelings in that situation. The next one is distribution. They have a responsibility as the leaders to see the land gets divided. So Joshua is going to distribute the land, but he's involving them in the process. But that's the goal. He said, that's what we're looking to do, is to distribute the land. But before we can get there, then there was reprimand, and there was accountability, and there's responsibility. He's building up to distribution. And then this is one that the next one in verse 7 are your exceptions. And in most projects, you're going to have exceptions. In this case, you have the Levites and Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. We had a special circumstance. They're on the other side of the river. And the Levites, they don't get any. So we don't need to do 8 sections. We only need to do 7 sections. Well, that's pretty important information when you're going to survey and divide it, because you're going to have to redo it if you did 8, and now we only need 7. So the borders will have to shift. So he gets those exceptions out there right off the bat. And good leaders are flexible enough to know what somebody comes and says, well, I can't do this because of this. Well, okay. But we would like for you to do this. You're the exception as a part of the congregation, but we still want you to be involved. Your health or your job situation may not allow you to participate in what everybody else is doing, but find something for them to benefit, to help further the cause of Christ. So the exceptions are in verse 8. And then in verse 9 is obedience. And Joshua was not exempt from obedience. So he set the example for others because he served the Lord. And then he encouraged them, required of them to obey the Lord. Whatever the Lord says when we cast these lots, then we're all going to go by that. So that's obedience. And those are good characteristics, I think, of leaders. And I want to go back into this section and just, I've got on the screen there lessons from Joshua 18. And we've covered the section that has all of these lessons, but we haven't mentioned all of them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but we dealt with the first one. How long will you be slack? In the New Testament, of course, be always abounding in the work of the Lord, 1 Corinthians 15:58. So we don't want to get to the judgment day and the Lord says, why were you so slack? Why didn't you ever really get with it? Let's sprint for the finish line. From this point on, you can't change the past. Hopefully we've done good work up to this point, but we can't change that if we haven't. But what we can do is redouble our efforts.
Right.
And if the Lord gives us more time, then we may be able to get more done between now and the end than we've done in our whole life up to this point, even though that may have been more years. But focus, effort, prayer, maturity, and opportunity can really open up doors. And how long have you been? Well, Lord, I wish I'd done better. I wish I'd done more. But from this point on, like the Apostle Paul, he found out he had been fighting against the purposes of God. But once he converted, he really converted.
Right.
And as best I can tell, he was probably about the midway point of his life when he was converted in Acts 9. He's probably about the same age as Jesus, maybe a little younger. So he was probably born about 0. Or maybe, Jesus is actually born -4 with the corrected chronology. So maybe he was just a little younger, but he lived to be probably 66. And so there's about 30 years between Acts 9 and Acts 28. And you could say that he hit the ground running and never slowed down.
Absolutely.
Traveled 12,000 miles with the gospel, 3 continents, scores of cities, baptized no doubt thousands of people. Wrote more of the New Testament than anybody else, and he did it in a very compacted amount of time. So he's a good example for us to say, if we really want to, then who knows what God can do with us. So I think that's a lesson to be learned in Joshua 18. A second lesson is delegation is key to effective leadership and also to time management. We talked about leadership, but I didn't touch on time management. I'm teaching a class right now on time management. The first time I've taught it in a quarter system. I've done weekends on it and a week seminar, but I've never done it in this. So I'm really enjoying going back through that. And none of us has enough time to do everything ourselves.
Right.
And the truth is, we shouldn't do it even if we had the time, because there are other people that can do things better than us. Years ago, I remember talking to an elder, and we had a conversation about this. And the upshot of that conversation was, I want to do what I can do better than others, and let others do what they can do as well or better than me. So am I too good to put tracts in a rack? No. I'm happy to do that. Wash dishes at the fellowship meal? No. Sweep the floors of the Bible school resource room? No, I'm not too good to do any of that. And take my turn if that comes up on the assignment sheet. But the truth is, when a preacher gets up to preach on a Sunday, there may be 100, 200, 300 people out there, and he's got 30 minutes. So he's looking at hours of time condensed into, people's time. It's condensed into that. Nobody else they're not going to be listening to anybody else but him. So if he swept the floors and put the tracks out and washed the dishes at the fellowship meal, but he hasn't studied, then he's going to cheat them out of what only he could do. Now, you spread that out a little further on time management, and you think, man, I got so much to do, and I've only got so many hours, so many days, so many years to do it. So what can I do better, or what do I have the responsibility to do more than other people? What are my talents? What have I signed up for? Preaching, service, an elder, missionary, whatever it is. And then, okay, I can't do it all. Who can I get to help me?
Right.
And there are people in congregations that sit on pews that don't really want to. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're uninterested. It's just they don't know what to do because maybe they've moved to this congregation from a place in another state, and they were very active at the smaller church they came from, but they've come here and it's a bigger church, and it seems like everything's being taken care of, and they don't really know what needs to be done. So part of leadership is to find these new members, talk to them, get to know them. Maybe they fill out a sheet of what they've done before, what their interests are, what they see their talents as, and then get them plugged in, because a lot of times you'll have young professionals that will move to your congregation and only be there 3 years, or college students 3 or 4 years. And if you wait for 2 years before you even get around to getting to know them, then they're going to not even really get involved in the congregation before they move. And that's not good for the church, but it's also not good for them because they're not developing their talents. They're not developing, keeping their hand in the work, and they may lose interest. So time management, it's better time management to spend a little time assessing, communicating,
I agree.
and then say, well, I got a lot to do. Would you do this? Yeah, I've been looking for something to do, Joshua demonstrates that, because they were gone. I'm guessing they were gone 2 weeks to walk that far. Maybe it was a month, but whatever it was, Joshua got some other stuff done during that time. He wasn't just taking a 2-week nap. He was leading God's people. If he had been out there leading the survey, then whatever he got done while they were gone, he would have had to do when he got back. He would have been behind. So there's a good leader. I think there's an excellent lesson to be learned there. And some people are just so hands-on. And I think perfectionism plays a role in that. Yeah. It's like, well, they won't do it as good as I want it done, so I'm going to do it myself. Well, that's okay for certain things. But if you take that attitude toward everything, you're never going to get anything done. Right. And plus, when you have children, could you make the bed better than they can make the bed at 7 years old? Yeah. Would it be quicker for you to do it than try to make them do it? Probably. But make them do it. All right. Because they need to learn how to do it, and they need to learn responsibility. And if you are consistent with that, they'll make it just as good as, they'll make up the bed just as well as you would have made it in a couple of years. Right. And then you'll never have to make it up again. Plus, they've learned an important principle, and you've saved yourself time over the long run. So you train someone, you get them to the point where they're effective. And there's some things that just don't matter, like that track rack. Let's say, well, I really like them all lined up straight, and I like them in a certain order, and the color coded, or whatever it is. I don't know, alphabetized. Okay, that's probably the best way to do it. But does it really matter? Right. If somebody else does it a different way, and all the tracks are available for people to come by and pick up, did it really matter that I didn't do it and didn't get done the way I wanted? You just have to be big picture enough to say what matters, what doesn't. Now, teaching the gospel, well, this guy doesn't know about instrumental music or about male leadership in the church. We're not going to put him in teaching a new converts class. He's not ready for that yet. He needs to be in that class, and then he'll be able maybe later to teach it. So you have to be able to sort through those. Well,
and there's psychological benefits to work.
There are.
So you are helping, so there is a sense where you're helping someone in that sense. Knew a widow who her and her children, she was not able to bring the standard, I say standard, the standard meal for yourself plus a meal for another family to a potluck.
Yeah.
And obviously didn't feel great about it because of her financial situation. But she was always doing the dishes. And for her, that was her contribution to the potluck.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when we, like you said, don't delegate or take those responsibilities for someone, we're taking more than just the load off their back. You're taking, mental benefits.
That exactly right.
That sense of contribution, that being a part of everyone. Absolutely. And so, and like you said, some of those things they don't matter when all's said and done. If you're not here and tracks get put in the board, are people going to be able to find them? Yes. And so that's an excellent thought, especially about prioritizing the time and all that, because it's all limited when all's said and done.
It is. That's right. The next lesson I'll just touch on and see what your thoughts are. I think I see here something we haven't brought out yet. It is important for leaders to be hands-on at the beginning of a project and at certain points, but not all the time.
Right.
And you see that with Joshua. He's there at the beginning. You're not doing what you need. Let's get this going. So he's firing them up. Then he sends them off and he's out of it for a while. But he's not out of it forever. And, when you get back, come see me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's strategic points. Same thing is true. Let's just take a VBS. The congregation is going to have Vacation Bible School this summer. So there's a planning session and maybe the elders are there or the preacher, whoever they want that needs to have some input there, what the curriculum is going to be and the dates and so forth. And then they, makes who's going to be involved in what. They make those assignments. And then they're not involved every week in VBS, from let's say November through March. And they haven't really given much thought to it. But they put on the calendar, we need to have another VBS meeting 2 months before VBS. Let's say that's March. So then they'll meet again and then, okay, status report. Who's been working, what you got done, and what problems you have. You need some budget money for what, where are we?
Mm-hmm.
Just, they put their hand back in the situation again, provided the leadership. Maybe you got two people that are disagreed about. Well, we think, I think it really needs to be this way, but, she thinks it needs to be that. And they listen, they think about, and they make their call, whichever way it is.
Right.
And then that untangles that knot and they can go forward again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe next time it goes the other way and the other person's opinion is taken. But so hands-on at key points is just good leadership. And if you just get it going, but you never check in, then it's likely to fizzle. It'll diminish. Same thing with deacons' assignments. It depends on the deaconship, depends on the personality. Some are very gung-ho and they get things done and they don't need much supervision. But a lot of times they will need you to meet with them again. Here's what we want you to be in charge of. And tell you what, let's meet in 2 months. Come back. Let's put it on your calendar in hours. You come back and meet with us. If it's February 15, we'll come back. April 15, we'll assess. We'll see what we can do to help and how that's going for you. Well, that helps him to know. I better get busy on this. I only have 2 months to get everything going.
Puts a timeline on things.
Yeah, it does. All right. The last point that I have in this first section is the best inheritance is the Lord. They were dividing land, but the Levites didn't get any land, but they had something better. Their inheritance was the Lord. Now, what that means, and I think I have some scriptures that I can give us on that in that section. What that means is whenever the children of Israel brought their sacrifices, then the Levites were supported out of that. They got part of it, So Numbers 18:20, Joshua 13, 14 and 33. And then these passages about sacrifices and offerings in Numbers 3:10, Numbers 16:10, and Numbers 18:1 through 7. So those that were Levites, full-time involved in the work of worship and serving God, well, God took care of them.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you'll have what you need. He did give them property, but they didn't have borders. They just had cities and a margin around the cities for their animals, and which we'll see in a later chapter. But I think that you and I, living in this generation, we don't have a land of promise to divide. The earth is the Lord's, fullness thereof. So our Father owns everything.
Right.
And we may own, quote, own for a while, a piece of property, even maybe acres and acres of property. It really doesn't matter. We're going to leave it behind in a little while. But our best inheritance is always the Lord. You may have inherited something from your parents, may have some sentimental value to it, may have some monetary value to it. It's not worth as much as what you have in your spiritual bank account, right. Salvation and hope and inheritance in heaven, all those things. So the Levites sort of are a precursor to the Christian in that sense, that it's not about the monetary blessings so much. It was more for them, but not for us. It's just about earning a living, supporting our families, being able to support the work of the church in the physical world. But ultimately, that's not what we cherish. We lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven.
Right.
All right, we've got maybe 6 minutes left, so I want to go through this last section and deal with verses 12 through 28. We didn't intend to read all this section anyway, but I do want to pull out some ideas. Get on the right screen here. All right, verse 12. We won't read all this, but I do want to notice, and we mentioned this in another class, that God is big on borders.
Right.
And you see that in this section too. I don't think we made this point though. These boundaries are distinctly drawn, which avoided land disputes later. If they just said, well, we own this section. Mm-hmm. We own over to the mountain. Well, what does that mean, to the mountain? Can you imagine two guys living beside that mountain saying, this is my land, right? No, this is our land. That's your tribe over there. The Lord didn't leave it up for argument like that. He went ahead and drew the lines. The lesson that we learn, and I'll make the application in families here. I'm sure there are applications to society and to the church, but in families, you do better if you draw distinct lines of inheritance. Sometimes people don't like to think about death, so they don't have a will, or right. They don't really think about their kids, what they will want or inherit afterward. And that's a very emotional time to lose a parent, especially a second parent. And then you have all these responsibilities, a house and all the property and the land. We got to take care of all this stuff. And, they may live at some distance away. It just can really be a challenge. And then, but when the emotions are raw and one say, well, Mom, I really want that, because that to me was what that represents mom. No, I've always counted on, that it's a little piece of property, a little heirloom of some sort. And they might lose a relationship that's priceless with a sibling over $100 vase or something. Mm-hmm. It's like we get lost in the minutia a little bit. But if Mom had taken that vase and made her choice, said, okay, I'm going to give this to daughter number 1, but daughter number 2, I got something just as good for you. And this is what to me, this represents you. Mm-hmm. This is something that to me, I want you to keep it because it connects you and me. So you can see the wisdom in that, where you don't want to leave your kids to fuss and fume and fight. And then, I take great joy, and I'm sure your kids are a little younger than mine, but I take great joy in the times when the kids as adults get together and enjoy each other's company, go on vacations together, or, maybe we're all together in same house, but they're in there playing a game and laughing, and just, it's just a joy for a parent to see that kind of love between your kids, especially as adults. And you can possibly help further that, or you can possibly help destroy that. So be wise. And that's a lesson about borders. And then in verse 12, just as we're passing by, the name Bethaven at the end means house of vanity or house of idols. It might be interesting to study the background of that. But of course, the prefix Beth means house, like Bethel in the next verse means house of God. El is one of the names for God. So we're going to skip ahead. Kirjath Baal in verse 15. Kirjath means city, so city of Baal. So these areas had been occupied by idolaters, and so you can see why they'd have those names. Then in verse 16, just in passing, there's an interesting note to make. That's the first reference to the Valley of Hinnom in the Bible, verse 16, which in the New Testament, of course, is the same place that was the city garbage dump for Jerusalem, and was the picture of Gehenna, hell, the eternal abode of the wicked, where the fire burns forever and ever. So this is the first time you find that concept in the Bible, although it's not developed here, but just the location is. And I was reading through this earlier today. Just another note, Jebusi, Jebusi, that's in verse 16 and in some of these other verses. That's another name for Jerusalem, Jebusi, which I don't know that I'd ever paid attention to that before. But you can see of course, the first letters are the same. And then it's a compound word, Jebusalem, righteousness and peace, I think, together. But this, of course, is the name before it was called Jerusalem and became a place for the tabernacle and later the temple to be built. All right, that gets us down to this last section. I'm not going to read all those names, but I just thought I would emphasize in the last one that what I just said, Jebusi equals Jerusalem, which is how this verse closes out, and their inheritance, the tribe of Benjamin has received their inheritance by the end of verse 28. I think that's everything I wanted to bring out in this chapter. You may have a note. Just going back through my notes quickly to see if I've omitted anything I wanted to cover, but I believe that's everything for chapter 18.
Yeah, just one thing to add, because procrastination, this is how this table or this chapter started.
Yes.
Probably a bigger detriment to the church than rejection, delaying something.
Yes.
They weren't rejecting what God said. They were just putting it off for another day. One thing I find interesting in the book of Mark, one of the key words in Mark is straightway or immediately. And it's essentially our Savior Jesus was a man of action. When something needed to be done, he took action immediately. He didn't delay or procrastinate unless it was wise to do so. But when you see the need presenting itself, Jesus took action and didn't, put it off. So great thoughts, Alan. Appreciate that. Join us next time for chapter 19.